Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin with chapter 10, verse 29. We read the psukim yesterday. I just want to skim the psukim extremely quickly. Moshe says to Yisro, we're traveling to the place which God said he was going to give to us. Come with us. We'll treat you well because God is going to do good things for the Jewish people. Yisro says, I don't want to go. I want to go back to my land. Moshe said, please don't leave us because you know that our camping in the desert, and you will be for us as eyes. And when you go with us, the good that God gives to us, we will pass on to you. It's interesting. Why do we need this whole detailed conversation? There seem to be aspects of it that I've sort of repeated. What's going on here? So Ramban on Pasuk Chavtes. Vayomer Moshe l'chovav. Kvar pirashti ki chovav shem chadash shekaru liyisro. Kashir Shav l'Torah Yisrael. First of all, just an interesting thing. Many of us are aware that Chovav is one of the names associated with Yisro, but the Ramban says this was a new name given to him because he connected to the Jewish faith. Kizet derech kol ha'miskayer. Ki lavadav yikra shem achir. It's a common thing when a person converts that they take on a new name. So the Ramban says Chovav, it's not just like Hashem decided that, which name are we going to use for Yisro this time? Random selection, Chovav wins this time. But the Pshat according to Ramban is he specifically called Chovav here because he had converted to Judaism, and therefore he's given a new name. And Chovav is related to Chiba, affection, that he had affection for the Torah. V'hine, Moshe chila panav lolecha simohem, v'yamar lo stam ve'tavnu lach. Moshe asked Yisro to come along, and he said to him in general, we'll do good for you. V'chashav sheyitnu lo min hasholol kesef v'zav v'gadim v'tzon uvakar. Moshe's intent was we'll have spoils we'll receive spoils when we go into Israel, silver, gold, garments, livestock, and we'll share spoils with you. We're not going to give you land in Israel. The land is for the children of Yaakov, and you're wonderful, but you don't have a birthright in terms of the tribes, etc. You're not going to get land, but there'll be all kinds of assets, and we'll share assets with you. So Yisro said, no thanks. The Ramban says, look at what he says back. Ki im el artzi v'el moladati elech. Yisro says, I want to go back to my land and my birthplace. Ramban says, you know what he's saying? Hisham nachalali, because I have land back home. You're not offering me land. Unchasim v'chavod, and I have prominence. This was the place that I grew up, etc. And you're going to treat me like a second-class citizen. Oz Amar lo Moshe al na tazov osan. Then Moshe says, don't leave us. Ki midatcha hamidbar. You know the desert very well, better than us. You'll be eyes for us. The kiva, that language of you'll be for us eyes was in the pasuk. The kibo shoaratzos, in the conquering of the lands. V'soreinu haderech asher nalaba, and you'll tell us what will be the best path to move forward. Umikola tovahu asher yetiv Hashem lanu native lach, and from all of the good that God gives us, will pass on to you. Ramas loseslo achuzav eretz tova b'scharo al torcho v'azaraso sheyasher b'kibush haaretz. So now, what seemed to be Moshe just saying the same thing again, Ramban says Moshe is responding to Yisro. He says the good that God gives to us, we're going to share with you, and what he means now is we're going to give you land. So Moshe is responding to Yisro's reluctance to come because of the real estate issue. So Moshe says, we'll give you land. V'aldati kinisratzelo bozev asakim. So the Ramban says, I think Yisro came. Kasher pirasti v'iskarti sham v'kach amar b'Yushalmi b'nei keni chosein Moshe meviyin v'korin tichsiv l'cha itanu v'etavnu lach. It's a very interesting Yerushalmi. Yerushalmi says that the descendants of Yisro, there's definitely an idea that the descendants of Yisro lived in Israel. And there's a whole thing that when you bring first fruits, there's a special formula said having to do with God giving us the land. So the question is, can the descendants of Yisro say that thing about God giving us the land? And the Yerushalmi says, sure, because that's what Moshe meant when he said, L'cha itanu ve'tavnu lach. Come with us and we'll do good for you, which is the psukim we just read, part of the psukim we just read. And the Yerushalmi clearly is understanding that Moshe told Yisro, we'll give you land. But the Ramban says, if you look at the Yerushalmi, it sure sounds like Yisro came along and Yisro took the land. It's definitely not agreed upon by everyone that Yisro came. It's agreed upon by everyone that there were descendants of Yisro who were with them, who settled in the land of Israel. But it's certainly not agreed upon that Yisro came with them. But that's the Ramban's pshat in the exchange. I want to go to the Sforno now. Sforno on Pasuk Lamed Aleph. Al na tazovo sanu. Moshe says, please don't leave us. Yelchu banecha lefachos imanu. So the Sforno says that the reason Moshe is asking a second time is he's saying, at the very least, send your children with us. If you're not going to come, at the very least, send your children. Because you know our camping in the desert. You know our story. So if you and your family go back home, that will cause a desecration of God's name in the eyes of the nations. Shiyomru, ilu ra yisro bohem inyan elokai be'emes, lo haya ozevo samhu vanav. They'll say, wow, it was really nice that Yisro went to join the Jews. Must have been he wasn't impressed because he left them. And so it must be that Yisro doesn't think they're the real deal or doesn't think their God is the only God. Now, if Yisro goes back home for whatever reason, decides to go back home, but he leaves his children there, he leaves his family there. So clearly Yisro bought in, and there's technical reasons why he's not staying with them. But if they all leave, it's going to be a desecration of God's name in the eyes of the nations. Vozeh hiskim Moshe v'Yisro vanav. Ki amnam Yisro chazar el artso. Sforno says Yisro didn't go along with them to Israel. Yisro went back to his land. Ka'amro v'yishalach Moshe es chosno v'yelech lo el artso. Earlier in Chumash, again, it's always confusing with the time travel within Chumash. But Moshe, it says Moshe sent Yisro back to his land. Vanav Hochim Yisrael beli safek, but without a doubt, says the Sforno, the children of Yisro came along. Moshe b'sefer Shoftim Ram of Nei Koni Chini Chosein Moshe Lume Iratz Morim Espnei Yuda. We have reference to the children of Yisro in Sefer Shoftim. So it's just interesting to see how different Mefarshim can even have a different version of the story of events, and certainly can learn the pasuk differently. But what's clear, according to both the Ramban and Sforno, is they're clearly responding to what seems to be just a pointless repetition of Moshe's point, unless you say there's a new nuance. So according to the Ramban, Moshe Rabbeinu was offering a new thing to Yisro, he was offering land to him. According to the Sforno, Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, okay, if you're not going to come, we at least need your children to come. So it's an interesting point. Not as much because we need guidance or anything like that, but because since you had the inside story, if you all leave, it looks like you weren't impressed. Okay, moving on to verse 35. Don't all sing at one time. I'm sure we've all realized that singing does not go well on Zoom. Sure we've all picked up on that over these months and years. Vayihi bin Soah ha'aron vayomer Moshe, and it was when the ark would travel and Moshe would declare, Kuma Hashem, rise up God via futzu, and your enemies will disperse via nusu misanecha mipanecha, and those who hate you will flee from before you. It's a very almost mysterious pasuk. It seems to be like a 2-pasuk island. The straightforward meaning of the verse is this is what Moshe would say when the Jewish people were in transit carrying the ark. But I just want to, and clearly it's a language of blessing, of pointing out God's tremendous power and force and caring for the Jewish people, etc. I just thought the Sforno over here was interesting. Sforno on Pasuk Lamed Hey, Vayihi ben Soah Aaron, Lo leches ulikones l'Eretz Yisrael. Says the Sforno, remember, this is before the story of the spies. So it's all systems go. When we're talking about the Jewish people traveling in the desert, The implication is traveling in the desert to get somewhere, to get to the land of Israel. So when the Aaron would go to enter into Israel, the plan was that they'd be entering into Israel. They would say, Kuma Hashem, Moshe would say, Kuma Hashem v'yafutzu oivecha. Rise up, God, and your enemies will disperse. Ki amram, lulei sholchu meraglim hayu nichnasem b'zulas muchama. If not for the whole story of the spies, the Jewish people would have just walked right into Israel, and there wouldn't have been a war. The nations would have just fled. And those who hate you will flee before you, unless the Jewish people come to and annihilate them. So it's just an interesting shot of the Sforno. According to the Sforno, this pasuk is all about sort of the anthem the Jewish people would say with their understanding that they gradually were on their way towards taking the land of Israel, and that the perspective is that until the whole thing with the spies happened, the assumption was they were just going to walk right in, no fights, no anything. And that, of course, ended up being very different than when Yoshua and his people ultimately conquered the land. Okay, let's go on now to chapter 11, verse 4. And we have in this parsha different stories of the Jewish people complaining about different things. Chapter 11, verse 4. The gathered group had great desires. And they also made the rest of the Jewish people cry. And they said, Mi yachilenu basar. And they said, who's going to feed us meat? What's going to be with the meat? Verse 5, we remember the fish that we ate in Egypt for free and all the different vegetables. Verse 6, and now our souls are dry, there's nothing here, except for this man, which ostensibly was pretty good. But the point was that this was just a general issue here. Just an interesting Rashi, and maybe we'll see the Ramban tomorrow, God willing. It's an interesting Rashi. Who's going to feed us meat? Second Rashi on Pasuk Daled. What do you mean, who's going to feed us meat? Did they not have meat? When the Jewish people left Egypt, it talked about the sheep and cattle they took with them. They had meat. Vim Tomar Achlum, maybe the meat's gone. Maybe they had fleishiks too much and there's no meat left. You remember the whole story when later on in Chumash that there was a group that wanted to stay on the other side of the Jordan because they had all this livestock and the land was great for grazing. So obviously there were animals. So then what are they talking about? Who's going to feed us meat? Just an excuse. Just an excuse out of nowhere. It doesn't even make any sense. That's the power of negativity. We'll talk more about this tomorrow, God willing. Okay. Okay. Oh, that's interesting, Abba. Thank you very much. It's interesting. Okay. Any other comments? Okay. Wishing everybody a great day and a reminder that the evening group will not meet tonight.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take care, everybody.